All right, you can hear me, Nicole? All right, she's nodding yes. We're at 11 o'clock sharp Pacific time, so let's get going on roses here. Welcome, everybody. I am Trevor Cameron, the general manager here at Sunnyside. Say hi to Nicole. She's running the show in the background there.
Hi, good morning.
Happy Valentine's Day to everybody here in the snow in the wonderful Seattle area. It is still coming down, and it's supposed to snow all day today, so we are closed again today, I hate to say, but luckily we made it in to get the class going here for you. So welcome, everybody. Like I mentioned, we are closed today, so the plan is to be open tomorrow. Like typical Washington, it's 30 degrees today and snowing, and tomorrow it'll be 45 and raining. So hopefully not too much flooding, but snow will be melted off pretty quick, and we will be ready to go tomorrow. Hopefully everybody got the information sheet. I've got my copy here to follow. That keeps me on task for the class. But if you haven't seen it, it's on our website. Certainly reach out. We can email it to you after the class. But this will give you some basic tips that we're going to cover here today. We're going to go through quite a bit of information. And just because I would like to see some flowers today on a snowy day in the middle of the winter, I have some slides to show you at the end. We're going to look at some pretty rose flowers, and I'll close our eyes and imagine and smell the great fragrance and think, yes, it is June here coming soon. So we'll get going. If you want to, I've got a list here at the nursery, but you can also always access our entire rose list and inventory on our website. So we don't ship plants, I'm sorry. But if you're local, you look at our list, that'll give you an idea of the 100+ varieties we do carry and have ready to go here for spring planting. So you'll see I took a funny picture this morning of our rose area in the back. I'll show you. It looks like a big white marshmallow, but they are potted here and ready to go. So we're going to start off by following the sheet here, just talk a little bit of general information on the roses. If you've grown roses or you're interested, the most important thing is sun, sun, and sun. So we want to put our roses in a full sun location. We need at least 6 hours of direct sunlight to keep them happy. The more, the better. I've kind of gone back and forth here in the Pacific Northwest with the wet springs. We tend to fight a little disease. If you have that morning sun, the days it does come out early in the season, it will dry the foliage off in the AM and probably keep your roses a little bit more disease-free. But the key is having that midday to afternoon sun is ideal. We want to make sure we have happy roses. We want good spacing and air circulation. You hear me mention that in most of my classes here, but I think the tendency is for some gardeners, they've got a small bed and they would like to plant a rose garden, which is awesome, but they end up buying too many roses to pack in too small of an area. So really look at your roses, look at how big they get. All of them will be clearly labeled medium, tall, bushy, and make sure we've got air in between them. If we have roses that are crowded, again, less sun, less air means more black spot, more mildew, and some more issues on the foliage down the road. Drainage is always a must. We can't have roses with too wet of soil. So a good amendment of compost when you plant them will always help, but we're not going to be digging a hole in the blue clay and trying to get a rose to live in a little water bowl. We want to make sure we've got great drainage. Even maybe bermed up a little bit above your grade, and a nice raised area is ideal. Certainly there's always a spot in most everyone's yard. They've got good drainage and sun. They can do roses. If we talk about amending our soil and we're planting new ones, I mentioned compost will never ever hurt anything. Behind me, I'll grab our big specialty bag. This is kind of a unique thing for roses we get from EB Stone Organics. So this is a specific rose formulated soil, rose and flower. The easiest way to explain that is, honestly, it works great as an amendment, but it also is a potting mix. I want to make that clear. If I'm going to try to grow a rose in a pot, I want it on my deck. That's a very good way to do a lot of roses. That is a specific potting soil that will give your rose all the kickstart it needs. So instead of buying regular potting soil and adding extra things to it, that EB Stone rose and flower soil's got everything you need mixed in there. A little extra alfalfa meal, a lot of things we're going to talk about today, and being all organic's got great nutrition. So take advantage of that rose soil. You can also use it as an amendment, the same idea as compost. If you have some at home, I'm digging a nice hole for a new rose. That's something I could mix in 1/3 with that, 2/3 with my native soil to give that rose a little extra kick here for springtime. So soils part one. I'm going to show you a few products here. Rose and flower food, again, EB Stone Organics. We'll do levitate in front of the camera. So that pretty pink bag will always tell you, there's my rose food. I use this on all my roses. I use it on perennials. I use it on a lot of things around my yard, but that's going to give me that extra flower kick. The numbers are a little bit different, a little more phosphorus, a little more potassium for more bud, more bloom. Still got nitrogen for good growth, but that's really going to keep me blooming. Ideally, I would really like to have you get on a fertilizing schedule with roses. They're very heavy feeders. If you want happy plants, lots of flowers you can enjoy all the way May through the fall, we have to keep them fed about every 6 weeks. So I would get my first dose down about right now. If you've got an existing rose, maybe it's a cup or 2 cups, depending on how big it is. You can follow the instructions on there. For newly planted roses, I would add a 1/2 cup of this to get started. Then you start kicking in with the cup doses down the road. So if you kind of follow that schedule here, late February, 1st of March, then we're into mid-April, we get into late May, we get into mid-July, we kind of get on that 6-week schedule. Once we get into late August, we pretty much shut that fertilizer off for the year. We don't want to encourage a lot of growth late in the year. We want to let those roses kind of start to go a little bit, not decline, but a little bit dormant as we start to cool off. Still plenty of nutrition to keep them blooming through the fall, but we want them to go dormant. So no late season feeding. We want to get on a 6-week schedule. So phase 1 is that rose and flower. I love alfalfa meal. This is another organic amendment. It's great for roses, good for a lot of plants, but roses in particular. This is another thing that I would add on top of that fertilizer. If you've got existing roses, maybe it's a 1/2 cup of alfalfa meal spread around the crown of that rose. If it's a new plant, probably a 1/4 cup is going to be plenty for you, but that's another one I'd put down here. And then the last one is Epsom salts. So magnesium sulfate's a great amendment to add in there. You don't need a lot of this. It's probably a 1/4 cup for an older rose, maybe an 1/8 of a cup or a couple tablespoons will get you going on a new one. This is all about flower. When I add Epsom salts, that's all about bud and bloom. You can put this on perennials, roses, other plants you want more flower on. This creates more bud and bloom. So it's a very bloom specific amendment that we can add in to give those roses a little extra kick. The last one you'll see on the sheet there is Sulpo Mag, and that kind of sounds like a funny one, but it's basically sulfur, potassium, magnesium. I ran out again this week. We'll have some shipped up again here pretty quick, but that's a little different amendment that I try to bring up this class here early in the spring, especially for older roses. If I want to give my root system, the graft, the canes, some of that older wood, a little bit of extra energy and a kick here in spring, that's a great amendment that I tend to use early in the season, skip it all through the growing season, and then I might put it down again in the fall. But those are 2 very mild, or a very easy, mild organic amendment that you can add in that will really help the graft, the root system, and some canes. So I know some people will probably ask questions about old roses. I moved into a house, it's only got 2 canes. What do I do with it? How do I get it to look better? Using all those things in unison here in spring will give you the best chance of telling that little rose, hey, I just moved in and I'm ready to take care of you. Let's get you back into shape a little bit so we can get those added in here in spring, and then off we go. Okay. So that kind of covers your amendments. Again, I mentioned roses in pots. Make sure you use that rose planting mix. That's a great way. If I've got a nice sized frost-proof container, we're not going to cram a rose into a little 12-inch pot. But if I had something, say 2 by 2 foot, maybe even a little larger long-term, that's a great size that I could grow a very nice rose on my deck, on a sunny porch, patio, anywhere I want a little bit of color and fragrance. When it comes down to it, people come in and ask for long blooming plants, annuals, die every fall. We use those in our containers. You're probably going to get as much flower power out of a nice rose in a container, even if you treated it as an annual, enjoyed it for the year. Maybe then you plant it out in the yard, or you send it to the compost heap in the sky and come and get another one next year for summer color. But very good way to get all season long bloom and some great fragrance on most of them as well. Okay, so don't think about the rose in a pot. If we look at caring for roses, that second section there, You know, keeping up on the fertilizer, as I mentioned earlier, is key. You've got to feed the rose. Most people come in here in June and ask why the rose doesn't look so well and it's off color and I hardly have any bloom and it's got black spot and on and on. If we start off here early in the season and get ahead on the fertilizing and the maintenance, you're going to have a much happier plant, a lot less work to do in the summertime. So keep the feeding. A couple of people that emailed us before the class, the questions were directed towards pruning, which is a great time of year to discuss that. You know, if I look at pruning roses, I've always kind of marked 2 holidays on the calendar. On the fall, it's about Veterans Day, you know, that early mid-November time frame. In the springtime, it's President's Weekend, which we just passed. With the cold, you know, coming in this week, you know, it's not the end of the world if you already did, but we certainly could wait a couple more days and wait for it to thaw out. This is the time of year we want to get those guys pruned back. So I always kind of stick with the rule, hip high in the fall. I want to get my plant cut back to a comfortable height. It's not going to break in heavy snow, you know, wind, the dog running around the yard, or whatever the issue is. I want to get it kind of to a comfortable height. In spring, I want to try to get it down to knee high. So if you remember that kind of hip high in the fall, getting towards knee high in the spring, that's a great way to do it. Now, I will put a huge asterisk after that statement and say, no, you don't want to clutch your climbing roses back down to your knees. So if you have climbing roses and you're trying to cover an arbor, a structure, or trellis, whatever it is, we want to leave those alone. We tidy them up a little bit, cut out thin wood, the rest of it, but we want to leave that height and that structure because I want to try to cover something. I don't want to start over again every season, of course. So, you know, my rule has always been pencil. If I walk out, you know, this time of year, I'm trying to get it cut down to about my knee level. I want that open center. If I take my hand, this is my graft or the center. I want all those canes coming out and up. I don't want things going back across the middle. I don't want too close together. I want a nice open structure to start with. And I get rid of anything that's not as thick as a pencil. It's kind of a good general rule. You can get all that twiggy undergrowth out of there. You'll probably stand back and say, what have I done? And then I'm guaranteeing you here, you get to May and you're like, oh, sweet. I got a nice looking rose bush with good spacing, a nice bloom, and off we go for another season. Okay. So hopefully that'll help you with a couple of the pruning questions, because that's an easy way to go. I do this class again, kind of a summer rose class in June, and we'll talk, you know, a little bit about summer maintenance and deadheading and some pruning ideas for summertime. But if you remember that right now, hip high in the fall, knee high in the spring, you'll be golden. Watch for blind shoots is the next one on the list there. And that's kind of a hard one to explain, but in our climate, in the cooler Pacific Northwest in spring, you know, all of our roses, it's snowing out there. I brought some in and dusted off some ice off them this morning. I'll show you a couple. They've already got buds coming out, and that's not going to change. You know, mine in my yard is the same way right now. They're certainly cold hardy. I'm not worried about how cold or snow we've gotten here for a few days, but they're going to start breaking bud here pretty quick. So as I watch that rose leaf out in spring and I'm looking at nice, fresh, clean foliage, I want to make sure that I'm starting to see the buds extend up and get me my rose flowers here as we get into later March into April. A lot of times around here, we get these blind shoots, and a piece of growth will come up and fork with 2 sets of foliage right and left, but I never get that bud to come out of the middle. So a lot of times I'll go out with our crop here and I'll spend a few hours here probably later March, early April, just like I would at home. And I would have you just look at your plants real quick and don't look at, oh, wow, I got leaves everywhere. It looks great. Look at the individual stems. And if you see that forking of the foliage with nothing coming up, I just want to go down that cane and cut to the next set of 5 leaves. Now it'll tell that rose, okay, it's springtime. Let's get going, and we'll get a little flowering a little quicker, okay? So right now, all of our plants have been pruned. You know, if you come down here and buy some here this week, you would take it home, pop it in the ground, put the foods in and all the things we're talking about today, and off you go. We don't have to do much more, but we just want to monitor that plant as we go through the springtime here, okay? The biggest thing, again, we talked about with roses is going to be pests and diseases. You know, they're not magnets for everything bad in the garden. I don't want you to think that's the case, but if I buy a typical rose and I walk away from it, I'm probably going to be disappointed in the summer. I'm going to get flowers. It's not going to die. It's going to live, but I'm going to have black spots on the leaves, maybe some mildew. Aphids sometimes get on the new growth. there's certainly some things that could get into the rose. So we want to make sure we start early in the season here, excuse me, and get things treated so we don't have to deal with problems later. So I'm going to leave this up to you to make your choice. You know, there's choices. You know, I kind of smile and jokingly call it murder, death, kill, you know, if I want to go to one extent. And then we've got our organic natural gardeners on the other extent. We've got options for kind of both and then one in between. So I'm going to kind of show you the three choices you should make here in springtime. Now, if I want to do the no-brainer, I want to get something like Rose Drench. If you can see that label there, made by Bonide, and the Rose Shield label. This is a systemic. It's not fertilizer. Someone's probably going to ask me in the questions. I don't like systemic fertilizer plus insecticide. Usually that has nothing to do with disease. The bug end's really easy to take care of if you ask me. I'm more worried about disease. So this has nothing to do with food. I want to make sure that's clear. I would put this in addition to rose food, alfalfa meal, all the good things I'm doing. But this is something I could pour in my watering can, and I could walk out right now for the first dose here, late February, March, after I pruned, and I could apply this around the rose just by pouring it simply out of a watering can that goes into the soil, absorbs through the root system, and essentially I've got a shield around my rose for about 6 weeks. So if I don't want to do as much spraying, and I would rather use more of a root systemic, this is a great choice for you, that I could just go out there once every 6 weeks here, mark the calendar, and off we go for the season. That will help me really help protect my plants from everything insect and everything disease. So that would be option one, in using a systemic, never anywhere near berries, vegetables, anything edible, okay? What we use on the property here is the Rose Shield spray. I wonder if that kind of washed out. So I can mix this in a tank sprayer, and I can go out and very specifically apply that to roses that I want to spray. We don't spray all of them here, but ones that perhaps maybe are a little bit more prone to disease, we do. So as a commercial place, we're trying to sell you folks happy, healthy roses with lots of good color. Yes, I'm going to protect the plants here at the nursery with a chemical type spray. At my house, no, I go the third route here, but this is something that is an option to you if you want to spray that I can put in a tank sprayer or a hose end sprayer and perhaps just apply once a month. You know, that's a little bit easier. Now, if I'm going to go green and I want to go organic, I'm going to neem oil. So this is packaged as Rose RX 3-in-1. Bonide's very clever. If you look at the label, if I can get the light right, do you see how that label has got a brown shoulder right there and a brown cap? So if you come to a store like Sunnyside, you're going to see their label set up with natural products. This is something that is natural organic. Neem oil has no chemical in it. That's very effective with the bugs and disease. The difference is I have to keep up on this, not using chemical. This isn't one of those things I can do every 6 weeks. I don't want to let my rose get black spot, mildew issues, and then try to fix it with this. I want to stay ahead. In the business here, we would call that IPM, Integrated Pest Management. I want to know my rose. I love my rose. I know it's susceptible to black spot and mildew and this and that. So let's just make sure we don't even get it in the first place is the key. So if I get this out here on the next couple of weeks, once I have foliage out on my plants here for spring, and I keep up on this every couple of weeks, I'm going to have just as nice of a rose that I didn't use chemical. But you need to be honest with yourself, because everybody comes in and loves the feeling of organic, and I'm happy with that, but you've got to keep up on it. You can't just do this once, 2 months later, go back out and do it again. We have to monitor our plants. I'm hoping you love roses because you're in the class today, so you should be out walking in your garden, looking at them as they develop. It's fun to watch plants, you know, break bud for another coming year and kind of get, oh, wow, again, look what I grew. I'm getting flowers. I get to smell my roses here for this season. So keep up on something like neem oil, okay? So those are our three issues. I would say this, and I kind of mentioned it with circulation, but again, I'm not as worried about aphids and some things like that. I can take out an insecticidal soap. I can make my own. There's a lot of cures that I can get little bugs off the tips of my rose branches. It's the disease, and once that gets in there for the season, you're going to be kind of stuck with it a little bit. Nobody wants to go out and pick leaves out of the middle and get all the black spots out and clean up leaves, you know, 10 times a summer. We want to try to keep it clean. all disease needs wet foliage. So that's the key in our climate with the little bit grayer winter and springs, a little more regular rain. Is if I'm a fungus spore, I'm blowing in the wind and I'm coming from the neighbors, I'm coming from next door, I'm down the road, wherever, and I have to find a rose leaf that I land on, and that leaf's got to be wet for about 4 hours for me to propagate myself, get a foothold, and start the process of the disease. So that's why I'm saying that the cleaner you can be, air circulation, the sunshine, you know, all those things matter. Don't ever overhead water, sprinkler systems, all those things that I can keep the water, the dew off of my rose. I'm going to have a much happier plant without even having to spray. Okay. So that'll get you a little bit. One other person emailed very nicely before the class about dormant spraying. And yes, if you had black spot, mildew, whatever the issue was last year, I absolutely don't have a problem with you applying one dormant spray to make sure you're clean. The more important part to me would be cleaning up all of the foliage at the base, make sure there's nothing down on the ground. And roses are notorious. This little snow spell might have ended it this year, but I know mine still had blooms on it after Christmas, you know, this winter, a couple of my shrub roses on my bank. So you've got to strip those plants down. We don't want to leave the leaves left from last year. It may look inviting. Oh, wow, it's still got leaves on it. I'll walk away. That should all be pruned out or at least pick them off. I want no foliage on that plant when we start here with our knee-high prune session. Nothing left at all. We start fresh from the start for the season, okay? So that'll get you kind of a little basics on growing. Now, if we talk rose plants real quick, you know, the breeders every year come out with new roses. You know, we try a lot of them. It makes me really happy. One of the funnest, more fun parts of my job is looking out new plants every season. Do we want to carry it? Does it replace something else that exists? It's always a fun thing for me to read catalogs and go to shows and look online and dig up information to see if it's something we want to have for our local gardeners. Should we be selling it to you? Is it a great plant? Roses is a really fun one because we actually test roses a year ahead of time. So with our growers, there's only two left that grow roses at the wholesale or bare root level, and that's Weeks Roses and Star Roses. They will send us a selection of the things this spring that will be introduced in 2022. I'm able to plant those in a big pot. You know, I feed them, but I do not spray them because I want to see, you know, if Mrs. Jones came in and swore with her pinkies that she's going to spray her rose every 2 weeks and never does, what is going to happen with that plant? Is it going to be okay? Is it really going to be bad? You know, all the roses that we choose to carry would be classified as disease resistant, but I want to make sure that's clear. Resistance does not mean immune. There's very few roses, I'm going to tell you later, that you don't have to spray at all. So we want to make sure we monitor it. So it's a way for us to judge, you know, yeah, that's a really good smell. Like the color, was pretty good disease resistant. Let's go ahead and carry it for our customers next year. So the breeders keep making them, and we try a few out every season as well. We'll show you the new ones that we tried last year that are on the property here for 2021 in the slideshow. You know, choose your rose wisely. This is kind of one of those aha moments for you as a gardener. Be honest with yourself. You know, we talked about the sprays. We talked about the timing. You know, what are you going to sign up for? Because I don't want anybody to be disappointed or come in and say they have a black thumb and they can't grow anything, because roses are very easy to grow. But be honest with yourself. Are you going to put in the maintenance, or are you just wanting summer color? I'm going to show you some options for shrub roses and some other things that we probably never have to spray. You know, if I just want to walk out in my yard and I want blooms all summer long, because there is no better plant for sun with the long flowering season than the rose. You know, I want to walk out and see color. I want to see smell, but maybe I don't care about clipping them and bringing them inside the vases, or I don't want to spray. There's a lot of decisions I'm hoping you kind of mull over today and then make the right choice for you. Yes, I'm signing up for, you know, a little bit extra picking and pruning and spraying. I've done both. You know, I didn't get married till late in life, and I got two great little boys. And I don't have time, honestly, right now to go home and prim and prune and pick away at hybrid teas and grandifloras and some other roses. So I've went to shrub roses. Before children, I had a regular rose garden. Someday when my kids are out the house, I'll have my little rose garden again, and I'll be back to having my hybrid teas and David Austins and all kinds of other roses in there, okay? So be honest with yourself. Color, maintenance, fragrance, and what are you going to use them for? Those are all decisions we'll help you with today. Now, you'll see that next section, the next line there is very simply hybrid teas versus grandifloras versus floribundas versus climbers, and we can add shrubs to that. All roses grow a little bit differently. Again, a couple people sent some great questions before the class. You know, could you please explain the difference of these roses? So if you look at the different classifications, because we keep them alphabetized by the type they are in our area, hybrid tea is very simply to me your florist rose. If I'm looking for a long stem, single bloom on the top that I can enjoy in the yard or cut to bring in the house in a vase, you know, give it to your sweetie on Valentine's Day today, you know, all kinds of things like that. That's hybrid tea rose. I want long stem, single bloom, okay? If I go grandiflora, those tend to be a little bit taller plants. Again, long stem, exhibition quality rose, but now I will have 3 or 5 at the tip. So again, great for cutting. Most of those are fabulous plants, but a little bit longer stem and a little bit taller growth habit. Floribunda is going to typically be a little bit bushier, maybe in the 3 to 4 foot range, and fuller with big, huge bouquets of flowers that repeat all during the summer. So floribunda to me is the superior landscape rose. You know, you can get great smell, you can get all the colors you want, but if I'm not interested in perhaps cutting them and bringing them in, I tend to steer people towards floribunda. That's my favorite type of rose personally, and things that I can grow as shrubs in a sunny landscape and have nonstop flower power starting in May, and I will be going all the way into the fall with color and fragrance on depending on the one that I choose, okay? Climbers, we mentioned earlier, you know, don't cling to wood. They don't vine and tie like a clematis or some other vines we might talk about. I need something to tie it to. Trellis, structure, arbor, gateway. There's all kinds of fun places that we could have a really nice climbing rose, but I'm going to treat those differently. Like we mentioned with pruning, I'm going to leave the wood because I want the height. I can certainly cut them back, you know, if I want to, let them start over, but I want to leave a little bit more wood. Now, I'll make this clear with climbing because that's probably a rose category that has changed substantially, you know, over my 30 years of doing this. And even before that, there is a lot of old school climbing roses and there's a lot of new school climbing roses. And we don't carry, you know, ramblers or old fashioned ones because typically those would bloom that one spectacular display late May, June, maybe early July, and then I'm done for the year. You know, again, I want flower power. So all of our climbers would be hybrids that would repeat flower. I follow the same deadheading principles, and I'm going to have one flower and another one and another one and another one. They'll continuously bloom all through the summer into the fall. So maximum flower that way, okay? So I'm hoping that kind of made sense on the classifications. If I throw one more in there, you'll see that next thing I wrote David Austin and English roses. Now, I'm not going to get red in the face because I've already done it, but I will tell you David Austin is not going to happen for most rose gardeners this year in the United States. With the pandemic and COVID, they have a wholesale division and a retail division, and they made the decision last year to sell all of our wholesale roses that the nurseries would carry to people online, unfortunately. So very, very limited nurseries will have very, very few David Austin roses. What I'm going to tell you is, yes, I love Austin roses, especially, you know, if you like the frankincense, the myrrh, you know, the hint of pear. There's all kinds of great fun fragrances, and they're great growers for the Northwest. But, you know, look at other options. You know, what we did this year, and I may just stick with this because I'm kind of red in the face at David Austin right now. We may not do as many of those in the future. So there's great English roses, exactly the same thing as David Austin, frankly cheaper for one, that you could come down here and pick today. You know, I'm going to show you a few flowers on the slideshow, and I'll point out the ones. Tell me that's not a David Austin rose. It's got the old-fashioned, you know, quartered cabbage rose look, really heavy fragrance, a lot of old school rose fragrances, grow just the same, probably a little better disease resistance, to be honest with you. So look at your options. Don't just because you come in and say, I'm looking for a David Austin rose, our staff's going to say, well, Those aren't around this year, but we can show you some great English roses that look just the same way and smell just as good too. So kind of stay patient. I got a feeling if you're a David Austin addict and you can't have anything but that, you're probably going to be waiting a couple years in the States. If you're in England, great, you probably got plenty. But in the States, there's only one distributor down in Texas for the entire country, and I do not think they're going to have much in 2022 either. So we'll keep our fingers crossed and see what happens. All right. So again, you'll see the new for 2021 at Sunnyside. I'm going to show you a few. I think we got nine or 10 new ones this year that we mixed into our inventory. You'll see pictures of those here pretty quick. And the last thing on there, before we look at some pictures, I just want to mention shrub roses. So I mentioned with myself, you know, not wanting to do maybe a lot of spraying and deadheading, but everybody wants flowers in the summer. And I've said it 3 times already, there's no better shrub for sun for continual flower and fragrance than a rose. So I wanted roses in my yard still, but I maybe wanted to cut down my time a little bit that I had to spend keeping them looking sharp. So look at shrub roses. I'm going to show you a couple in the slideshow, but if we look at rugosa rose, many of you may know that rose species, and a lot of hybrids off of that. You know, those are plants that if I took a systemic spray and I sprayed that plant, I'm going to burn it. You know, those are ones we do not have to spray, period. Maybe I get some aphids. Sweet, little insecticidal soap, I'm good to go, but I'm not worried about the black spot, the mildew, the disease side of that equation. So look at rugosas and hybrids. There are some really good options, and a lot of other shrub roses out there. I'm going to show you a few again in the slideshow that I would get great smell, continual flower, all kinds of color options that I just don't have to put in the time to deadhead, to prune, to spray, and all the rest. We still feed them. I want to make sure that's clear, you know, give them some food, but I can probably walk away from some of those other things that we've been talking about. Okay. So give me a sec here, and I'm going to try to share my screen. Everybody see that, Nicole? Can you see that? Okay. So that's a picture I took this morning. There is our roses. Doesn't that look like fun? Just come up here and buy one. They look like little marshmallows. So we got some snow, but that's kind of our rose garden area. We got about 1,800 roses in. Just one second. We got about 1,800 roses in and ready to go. And again, we're supposed to melt off tomorrow and start raining, which is our typical weather. So the snow will be gone. And as soon as the ground's thawed, pop them in the ground. They're ready to go. They're ready to go right now. So I'm going to show you a few pictures. This first section here is going to be, hold on one second. So there's our roses in the snow. If I show you some new stuff for 2021, so these are all roses that we tried out last year to see how they did for smell, for disease resistance, and all these were pretty good here for us. So we have them in inventory for folks to come down, gardeners to grab them for 2021. So Enchanted Peace is a new hybrid tea, a derivative off of the Peace Rose, a little bit different color. Peace is an all-time classic. We still have that as well. But Enchanted Peace will offer you a little bit more on the pink side of that same kind of idea. Fun in the Sun is the perfect example of what we were just talking about with the Austin roses. If I put that picture up, I bet you 99% of rose gardeners would go, ooh, that's a really pretty David Austin rose, because it has that quartered cabbage, old English rose style look to it and extremely heavy fragrance. That's a great old rose fragrance on that. So Fun in the Sun would be a new grandiflora, nice and tall. If we look at ground covers, which I would put this in as part of the shrub roses, the Happy Trail series is excellent. We've got 4 colors of these now, but let's say I have, you know, a sunny border, a bank even, somewhere I would like to grow kind of a sprawling rose that eats up some ground. This is what I have going on my south-facing bank. I may not get great smell on these, a light fragrance, but I've got great color that I don't have to spray, that is going to repeat flower all through the season without doing any deadheading either. So the 2 newer ones, the Playful Happy Trails has got that really nice red with the yellow eye. And then the Sunset one, you're kind of get to those pinky coral, you know, kind of sunset shades. That's a great name for that one as well. But now I've got a rose that's just going to get you know, 2 or 3 feet tall and spread side to side so I can eat up some ground. If a couple more new ones, the Knockout Petite. Many of you may have tried Knockout roses. They're extremely popular down the southeast of the United States. They work great in the Northwest. They don't have fragrance, I'll be honest with you. That's one that we would have for color without smell. But the Petite one is the new one. We got a bunch of these in. This is literally a miniature shrub rose. So I can have, this is a great container if I'm looking for that hot pinky red color on a little small 2 foot by 2 foot rose. This is an excellent choice to grow in the sun in a nice container, or use in the ground as a little summer color on a smaller border. Not going to get very big at all. Okay. Painted Porcelain, I think, was one of the prettier ones that came out last year. That picture is a pretty good picture, but it's almost like a creamy pink. So if I got good smell with that, hybrid tea. But if I looked at the rose sideways, I would almost have that creamy color underneath the petal and then the light pink on top. So very cool. Almost looks like what you would see in a florist shop, a little bit higher end rose. Perfume Factory. I could probably just say that name and what comes to your mind. If you close your eyes, you're like, oh yes, that smells good. So Perfume Factory is one with heavy fragrance, and it's a really nice color, kind of a little different shade towards that magenta, a little bit of plum in it too, but it's a little different color than most of the hybrid teas we have out there as well. Sitting Pretty is a new grandiflora. And again, if you looked at that rose, it's got more of the kind of rugosa, a little bit look to it, but it also looks a little bit English in bud form. That's another one that I would put towards the top of the disease resistant list for a tall grandiflora. And again, excellent fragrance. That's one we're going to get really good old rose smell from. Floribunda, Sunset Horizon. If you know me down here, I'm an orange and a yellow guy. So that's would probably be my favorite color right there. That Sunset Horizon's a real pretty Floribunda. Not super fragrant, but very good disease resistance and a really nice hot color. The Floribundas, like we mentioned, always kind of open in bouquets. So that's a great one for color change. When I look at that in bud, it'll look kind of reddish orange. And then when it's open, it's yellow. So as those groups of flowers progress and open during the summer, you're going to have a really nice kaleidoscope of the hot colors, the yellows, the reds, the oranges. Golden Opportunity is a new climber. That picture is a little bit washed out because it's a pretty bright yellow. And that would be another good climbing rose if I had a structure on it to grow on that repeat flowers, got decent fragrance, and again, above average disease resistance. Now, just because I want to see some flowers today and we're in the middle of winter and I'd like to smell all these right now, but we're going to look at just a couple. Like I mentioned, we have over, I think, about 140 different roses in inventory, and we'll get some more shrubs in during the course of the spring as well. But these are some of the ones to maybe keep an eye on. It was hard for me to only pick a few and not put 100 of them on here, but you probably don't want to stay till 1 o'clock. So I just picked a couple of them here to kind of give you a little bit of range and maybe some ones you just don't see everywhere. White has made a huge comeback, really, of all flower colors, in my opinion. Everybody wants white this, white perennials, white pots, white everything, you know, good, classy color. Sugar Moon, I think, is the best white rose that's ever been introduced. It's the best disease resistant. It's got great fragrance. I think it's better than Honor or JFK. I mean, we can go on and on. They're all good white roses, but if you were going to come down here and say, I want your best white hybrid tea, I would send you straight for Sugar Moon. I think that's about as good as they get. Lots of good red rose options. You know, we've got Ingrid Bergman and Mr. Lincoln and a lot of the old classic ones. Take a look at some of the newer reds. Firefighter is a great one. Maybe not quite as heavy a smell, you know, but again, if I'm not interested in cutting it, I think it looks as good as any red, and it's a much cleaner plant than Ingrid Bergman or Mr. Lincoln. Double Delight is probably still our all-time selling rose. I think we still get more of those in than any other. It's an award winner going back 50 years ago. It's been around forever, but everybody likes old Double Delight. It's probably our most asked for rose. I'm always going to have that kind of triple color with that pinky red, the white, and the yellow, kind of a nice multiple color rose. If you like the apricot, kind of side of things, Just Joey is the best one for the Seattle area. There's a lot of options in different parts of the country for that color. But if I want to go for maximum disease resistance and a little bit more reliability, Just Joey is the one to get if you like that apricot blend. Some grandifloras, probably Twilight Zone might be my favorite rose in the property here the last few years. Again, looks a lot like a David Austin. Extremely heavy old clovey rose fragrance. That's one of our best sellers. I think that's probably our staff favorite around here. And plus, you can't get purple. I mean, that is as good a purple rose as you're ever going to find. If you like that purple color, check out Twilight Zone. That's a big, tall grower, a really good bloomer with heavy fragrance. We have a lot of good grandifloras, but I kind of throw Parade Day in there because I wanted to show you maybe some different options. If you can see that picture, I've got literally a variegated flower. So if you like something a little different, that would have the pink with the white streaking in it, a little bit different color, kind of fun in the landscape or to cut and bring in. The next one there, Miss Congeniality. I call it the Sandra Bullock rose, but I probably can't say that, so I'll keep it as Miss Congeniality. That's one that, again, would be kind of like the opposite of the variegated rose I show you. We would call that with a Picotee color. So if I've got that base color and it looks like somebody took a paintbrush and kind of edged all those flowers, very striking in the garden or as a cut flower. Years ago, I would have said that's the only way you're going to get that is from South America. You go to the florist shop and buy a bouquet, but there's some really good kind of bicolor Picotee style roses now that you can find in a few different colors. State of Grace is one that came out last year. Again, look at that rose and tell me it's not a David Austin. I mean, that looks just like a good old classic, English rose. Again, heavy fragrance. That one, I've kind of got that really cool kind of coppery apricot pink blend as the flowers age. You'll get some really cool colors going with that. And then again, I mentioned, my personal favorite. I love Floribundas. I put a few in here that maybe some little different colors. Arctic Blue was new a season or two, and that's about as close to blue I think you're going to get on a Northwest rose. It looks very lavender to light blue color with kind of that cream again on the back side of the petals. So very, very cool color. You can see the perfect Floribunda. That's my bouquet right there. Every stem will have a little bouquet of roses like that. Burst of Joy. If you like the orange and the yellow again, I couldn't resist putting that one in there. Celestial Night gets me close to purple again, a very unique kind of plum. Again, looks a little bit like the English style roses with good fragrance. Julia Child has been out for a while now, but I would always put this at the top of the list. If you like yellow, and you wanted the most indestructible Floribunda rose, or frankly, probably most of the roses out there, and you didn't want to go Rugosa, I would steer you towards Julia Child. I think that might be the most disease-resistant rose on the property. Very easy one to grow, great heavy fragrance to it, and a very easy one for home gardeners. Rosie the Riveter, if you could see me, I do my bicep flex, right? Rosie the Riveter gets you kind of that orangey side of the Floribunda rose. Again, very good disease resistant. That's another very popular one around here for Floribundas. And kind of for nostalgic reasons, I had to put the Sun Sprite on there. I buy a lot of these because that kind of brings me back to childhood a little bit. In the first nurseries I worked at years and years ago, Sun Sprite's been around forever. If you like yellow and you like fragrance, it's not the top of the line for disease resistance. Very manageable one though. I can guarantee you that is the first rose to bloom every single year at every nursery I've been at for 30 years. I mean, it is a great early yellow that starts probably the first week or two of May and then continually goes with deadheading all summer long. A couple climbers, Joseph's Coat, just to kind of show you maybe a multicolored one. You can see as the flowers age, I get some fun different colors with something like Joseph's Coat. Excuse me. Then you've got an old classic climber, nice bread with super heavy fragrance like Don Juan. And we've got a lot of good climbers out there. whites, yellows. There's even a purplish one, pinks, and every shade in between. So those are just a couple of climbers. And then here's some of the shrub roses. So if we look at drift, that would be a series of rows, kind of like we talked about the happy trails. I want something maybe 2 to 3 feet tall that I don't have to deadhead. Probably not real heavy on the fragrance, to be honest with you. But I want color, and I want not to go out and prune. That would be a great choice, again, for those lower borders, slopes, areas in sun that I want color all summer long, but I maybe don't want to do as much spraying or pruning. Edith's Darling is one I put on there. I'm sure some of you have seen the BBC series, the Downton Abbey. They've named quite a bit of roses after the characters on that show. I'll be honest and say I have not watched it, so I'm not going to be an expert on who's who, but Edith's Darling is the smallest of their shrub roses they've named after that show, and that's got a great fragrance on a very small plant. I don't know that would ever get probably bigger than 3 feet by 3 feet. It's got great color, again, that English style rose flower with nice bloom and an easy one to grow. A couple of fun ones. I wasn't sure if I call these the bullseye roses. If you look at that, In Your Eyes, we could call that the Peter Gabriel rose, but maybe everybody doesn't know that song. So if we look at those bullseye roses, very interesting. I didn't know if I would like those when they started coming out 3, 4, 5 years ago, but they are really fun. I mean, they're not heavy on the smell, but they're really fun landscape color. And you can see that picture. That's the same plant. Believe it or not, that's not 2 different roses mixed together. So as these flowers open, I change color, I get different spotting on them. So really fun. There's quite a few of these out there, some different options out there at the nursery, but In Your Eyes would be one. Take It Easy, we could stick with music. We'll call that the Eagles rose, right? No, we can't say that either. But Take It Easy would be a nice red shrub rose. So again, not super heavy on the fragrance, but if I want to look out and see classic red rose color, you can see a little bit of cream in the middle of that flower, and I want it all summer long, that would be a good one to choose as well, okay? Last couple here are the rugosas. So if you've had rugosas, you know what I mean, but, we live right here in Marysville. If I was down in Everett, my hometown, these are things the cities would plant, as curbside planting. Some people call it the freeway rose, growing in between I-5 here and there. I could take a lawnmower to this. I could take a hacksaw to it. I could chop it off, and it always comes back. So rugosa rose is one that if I want heavy fragrance, I want indestructible, honestly, that's one you might want to look at. Rugosa alba on the left would be the tall one. So if I want a big hedge, a barrier type rose that would grow probably 6, 8 feet in most yards and sucker and spread, the rugosa rose makes a wonderful specimen. There's a lot of hybrids out like Purple Pavement. You'll see a number of other ones on our list that have all the traits of the rugosa rose, the species, with the clean foliage, the heavy fragrance, the repeat flowering. But now I've got something down there more in that 2, 3, 4 foot tall range that I can keep more as a shrub. I've seen some people even clip these into a hedge. Very, very easy. The other thing cool with rugosas is they used to call them sea tomatoes. So if you've had rugosa, you know what I mean. When these are done blooming, I get beautiful rose hips. So some folks make tea with them. They look awful pretty as we get into fall and the winter when you've got those big, bright orange red hips, kind of hanging out in your shrubs too, okay? So hold on, I'm going to stop my share here. There's a whole bunch of roses overload, right? So I feel better. It's snowing. It's gray today, but I just smelled some roses in my brain. I closed my eyes and I imagined it was June, and it smells wonderful in here, let me tell you. All right. So before we do some questions, just to mention a couple things real quick. We do have the sale going on with the weather up here the way it is here yesterday and today and probably tomorrow. We have extended the discount. So if you were at the class yesterday, you come down and buy berries and things from that class all the way through next weekend and get the 20%. We're doing the same thing with the roses today. We don't want people to get crazy Drive down here in the ice tomorrow, let it melt off. If you're working all week, come down next Saturday or Sunday. We've got 20% off all the roses you want on discount, as well as that good organic EB Stone rose food, 20% off. This is the 5-pound pouch. We also have nice large 15-pound bags. So if you've got an existing rose garden, the single best thing you could do is come down here and buy a big old bag of fertilizer and get some food on those roses here right away. Okay. So discounts are covered. I'd like to thank everybody for the questions on the email. That's fun for me all week to see some emails come in. Folks are excited about the upcoming class and throw some questions at us. Hopefully we covered those all today on the class, but with that, we'll turn it over to Nicole. We can get the rest of the questions done right now.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. We're going to do some questions. If you have to leave early, we always record this so you can go back and watch it again, catch information you missed, write things down, whatever that may be. It should be posted on our website later today, or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and get notification when it gets posted. And if you're gracious enough to do the survey that it prompts you with at the end of the class, we would be happy and ecstatic to hear your feedback. Make sure if you include any sort of specific questions where you want us to get back to you, that you include your email or a way for us to reach out to you, because those come back as anonymous. So it's hard for us to reach out unless you tell us. And we're happy to talk with you about anything. Any questions we don't get to today, or something that just pops up later after we leave the class, send us an email, give us a call. We love talking plants, and we'd be happy to talk with you about them as well. So we're going to start some questions here. Trevor, we talked in the beginning about fertilizing and kind of a schedule for that, but you also mentioned alfalfa meal and Epsom salts. How often should you do those?
You know, if you can, ideally stick on the same 6-week schedule. For sure, I would always do a dose of all 3 of those come springtime. But again, there's a little bit of alfalfa meal in the rose and flower food, so I'm not as much worried about that in particular. The Epsom salts, if you keep up on that every 6 weeks through the season, you're going to see your flower count go through the roof, because that's all about more bud and more bloom.
We've had some questions about deer resistance. Is there any way to make them less attractive to the deer?
I gotta be honest, that's one of the most perplexing things I've ever seen with deer, because we've had them mount rugosas down, and if you have a rugosa rose, I don't know that there's more thorns per square inch on any living thing on earth. I cannot believe an animal wants to put a rose in its mouth, but having said that, I do not have a magical answer for the deer. They are always going to nibble on roses. You could try, planting a deer-resistant plant around them or as a barrier. I don't mind some free pruning, off and on. That's okay. But if they're mowing them down every year, we've got to do something to protect them. Try a repellent. I've seen all kinds of things on the internet, from hanging old bars of ivory soap to this and that. You're welcome to try any of the above, but I'm just being honest. I do not have a magic answer to keep the deer away from your roses.
Darn it, too bad. Should we add bone meal to the roots of our roses?
It would not hurt anything. I don't have a problem with bone meal. I liken bone meal with bulbs myself, because it's pretty much pure phosphorus, and it's all about bloom. I would rather have a little bit more balanced food when we're talking rose, because it's not just about give me a push and a flower on a daffodil. It's about healthy leaves, good root system, and getting flower. So I would not use it as a substitute by any means, but certainly you got a big bag of bone meal around here. Like, what do I do with all this? Throw a little extra on the rose. It's not going to hurt anything.
Excellent. You talked a little bit about the Sulpol mag. How much should you put per plant, and especially new versus old?
Yeah, that's the same thing. If we're doing that again, it's more of a early spring and a fall thing with me. On an old plant, you might use a 1/4 cup, would be about as much as you'll need, sprinkled out nice and evenly around the drip line. On a new plant, you probably put a couple tablespoons in there is going to be plenty.
You talked in the beginning about, some of the solutions to take care of bugs and diseases. Yep. Are any of those pet friendly?
Absolutely. Well, let me say this before we go any farther. the EPA, you know, none of us would ever sell you anything. If you follow the label, it's safe for everything. So if you keep your dog, cat, child, whatever, away from that plant, you could spray it with the chemical. Once it dries on, you're fine. You know, as long as your animal's not going out there and eating the leaves, you're fine. It soaks in, it dries on, and we're done. If you want to stay strictly safe, it's all about the natural organic thing. So, you know, neem oil would be my go-to, as I mentioned earlier. You come down here and get that Rose RX and start on a regular neem oil schedule. That would be the safe side of everything.
Somebody asked specifically about growing garlic underneath your roses. Would it help lessen your disease?
I don't think it's gonna. You know, that's probably a good little wives' tale at some point. But I don't have a problem with you planting stuff around the roses, ground cover. There's other things you can mix in with roses for sure. And garlic certainly suitable too, but I wouldn't count on it. The smell of garlic will help repel some insects. That's an easy one. I don't think it's going to do much for disease prevention though.
You talked a little bit about dormant sprays in the beginning. Can you talk about which ones specifically you'd use?
Well, you know, again, it's the same sprays that I talk about at most of our class. The horticultural oil. If I've pruned my plant first, I've stripped my old leaves off, I got nothing, and I want to start clean, I apply that horticultural oil. That provides, covers all the canes, the thorns, everything, chokes off oxygen, so I don't have bug eggs, fungus spores. Everything's kind of starting clean. Copper, you have to be real careful of with rose, because roses, well, not just rose, but there's a lot of plants that could get copper poisoning. If we use copper as a repetitive fungicide on a rose, we're going to have issues as we get into the season. So one time in the winter, absolutely, that's a great preventative. I mix that same mixture of the liquid cop with the horticultural oil, but just make sure you remember, I'm not going to go back and use that liquid cop as my maintenance fungicide every 6 weeks. Eventually your rose is going to turn kind of a purpley blue color and not look so swell, because the copper is not a product the rose can absorb.
You're going to have to bear with me because this one is more of a scientific term. So, right, let's get ready for this. Somebody asked about Bacillus amyla. Do you know what I'm talking about? Is it effective for disease prevention? It seems like it's an ingredient perhaps in some of those.
Yeah, most of the sprays, well, you know, for us, maybe I should have brought a bottle of it in, because we carry that in a name brand product. Here by Bonite. Serenade used to be the pink bottle you could find around. When I put a Bacillus in a molasses solution, is actually what it's in. It's exactly to me like the neem oil. You could call it fungus eating bacteria, you know, to simplify things. When I apply Bacillus onto the foliage, it colonizes that leaf. And we talked about a little bit about the fungus spore. I'm blowing in the wind and I want a nice healthy rose leaf I can land on, propagate myself, and start to cause black spot mildew, rust, whatever it is. If I have that Bacillus on there, that does not happen. So I want to make clear, because I use that a lot in my own yard, my lawn, my vegetable garden. It's good for a lot of other issues, but you have to keep up on it. It's not one of those things like we talked about the neem oil. I can walk out in the spring, my rose leaf's out, I put it on once, oh, I'm good for the year. That's something I have to keep up on every couple of weeks, especially in the wet weather.
And does mulching underneath your roses, does that help protect them from any fungal or disease issues, or does it just create more?
No, I would say absolutely doesn't create more. It's going to help to some extent. If you don't get out and clean up all your old leaves, if I can mulch in the fall specifically, I got that stuff down underneath the soil level, and it's not going to be right on the surface to get back on in springtime. Compost will always help. I mean, I mulch all mine at some point fall to Christmas every year at my own house. Then in spring, I can take that mulch, go away from the crown of the rose, stick all my fertilizer, alfalfa meal, all that stuff around, and then cover it right back up with some compost, and I'm good for the year.
We've had a lot of questions about container growing, but can you talk through, you know, just some brief tips on, you know, what size container, how long will they last in there? Do you need to ever transplant them in the ground?
Well, if we talk container rows, you know, we're not going to disown you if you use a regular organic potting soil, but if I want a happy rose, I'm going to go to that rose potting mix that I showed you earlier from EB Stone. That's got all the goodies mixed in for you. It's basically potting soil on rose steroids. I mean, I'm going to have some extra goodies in there that I don't have in regular potting. So mix is part one. The pot, I would always get a frost-proof glaze, no plastic, nothing I have to worry about protecting in the winter. That's one you would probably get 2 foot by 2 foot, would probably last me, you know, I'm guessing you'd probably get have that rose in that pot, depending on the variety, 4, 5, 6, you know, maybe 7 years or so before I'd have to take it and transplant it out into my yard. If you want to grow, you know, a big Mr. Lincoln or a typical, you know, rose that some people know, and you want to keep it in a pot forever, you're probably talking more like the half whiskey barrel type size. The one thing I'll mention right now, as long as we're talking about, you know, containers and the snow's coming down, you know, all the roses you see at Sunnyside and frankly anywhere are going to be of 2 genres. We have grafted roses, where if you look at your rose, you're going to see a knob at the base with my canes coming out of it. You probably recognize that term. Or it's going to be own root. Now, for us, I try to get everything we can own root. If we lose the graft, we've multiplied our hardiness by 4. So I can grow an own root any rose in Eastern Washington in a cold climate, even frankly up towards the Arctic Circle on some of those. If it's grafted, I can't go much down towards 0 degrees or I'm going to lose that plant. It's not the rose that's not hardy, it's the graft. So with the container question, I would be real careful which rose I chose. If you're in a colder area, look for something own root. That'll ensure that you're probably okay through the winter in the container. If it's grafted, I'm going to be watching for weeks like this. And when we start dipping down into those low 20s, high teens for a night or two, I might be throwing that pot in my garage for a couple days up against the house, somewhere a little more sheltered, or grabbing some cloth, burlap, old pantyhose, something to wrap that graft with and give it a little bit of insulation.
So when talking about grafted versus own root, is there a way to tell, are there certain types of roses that are always grafted, or, you know, specifically the Austin and English? Are those usually grafted?
Well, that's a great question. I would say the opposite. You know, again, I'm not going to use the word David Austin very many times a day, but most of his roses are frankly own root. If we had Austin roses in like we typically do, 90% of the Austin roses we carry are own root. That's an easy one. The problem with own root, shrubs, all own root, I can tell you right now out there, you got no issues. For us, you know, it's probably 25% of the rest of the roses are own root. The rest are grafted. Some roses cannot be grown own root. It just is a weak plant that doesn't perform well. Double Delight comes to mind. Mr. Lincoln comes to mind. There's certain plants you'll never find own root. I mean, just to be honest, don't waste your time looking. If you don't see it, it doesn't exist because they're just hard. Rose growers are trying more and more of these every year on own root because it opens up their business for, you know, Iowa, the Dakotas, and different areas that they couldn't have that rose unless it's own root. So there is more and more getting grown that way, but some varieties do not take on own root. It has to be grafted. If you looked at your plant, let me grab one here. Like I almost got all the snow melted out of it this morning, but you can see it now. So if I look at that plant, this is a Floribunda called hot cocoa. So look at that rose. Do you see that big swollen area right out of the soil? That's my graft union that the rose is butted into. So this rose, we'll get wet here hugging this thing. This is hot cocoa. None of the rest of this is. So a lot of people will call in summer and say, well, my hot cocoa is blooming great, but I got all these shoots coming off down below the graft. What is it? That's what we would call garbage rose or rootstock rose. And you want to get rid of it. Don't let it grow. It's going to take all the energy out of your rose that you do want. So watch those grafted ones for anything coming off the root system. It's what they used to call Dr. Huey rose. It's just an old rootstock rose that it's easy to graft to. Consequently, say you live a little bit colder climate, you had something like that, and this year you walk out and you're like, what is going on? That is what will grow if you lose your rose. So if we kill that graft in the cold weather and you got green coming up, you may go, oh, sweet, it lived. And then we get to June and you're like, that's not my flower. Get rid of that thing and get a different rose planted in there, because now you've just got the rootstock left.
Can you propagate your own rose?
You know, a couple people emailed me about that and I gave them some tips. I'm not saying you can't. You would take small, young cuttings, probably not quite yet unless you got a greenhouse. But yes, you could probably get a piece of a rose to propagate. I would wish you luck grafting. You're not going to have access to the rootstock, to graft union, all the rest of that. That's a grower thing. You're not going to be able to have access to things like that. But, you know, shrub roses, easy ones, it's certainly worth a try. I mean, it's not going to hurt you to give it a try. Get something really well drained, like a seed starting mix, and get some rooting hormone. Follow the instructions on there. You'll nick the bottom bark, dip it in there, and then cross both fingers and both toes, and hopefully you'll get a rose.
You talked about tying or securing a rose, you know, the climbers. What's the best way to secure them to whatever they're climbing?
Well, there's a lot of different ways you could use to tie. Never anything metal. You know, say that if you were here, I'd make the person who asked 3 times, I will not use wire to hang my rose, because wire will cut into the bark. So as long as we have something stretch tie, probably is what I would use. Even some good jute twine, you know, anything that will stretch a little bit as that rose grows is best to adhere to. There's tomato clips. I've seen all kinds of fun stuff. You could try, but I would avoid the fishing line, the wire, anything with wire in it, unless it's really coated with something soft. Make sure it's something that'll stretch a little bit as that plant grows.
Excellent. We talked about ground cover roses a little bit. What other type would those be called? Are they also considered shrub roses or rugosa?
Yeah, well, and again, there's a little bit of both of those terms. We mentioned the Happy Trails. That's a great series from Weeks Roses. We have 4 different colors here. That would be one option. The Drift series, we carry a number of those colors as we get into spring. That's another option for ground cover. Also Flower Carpet, which we don't have quite yet. We buy those in grown. Those aren't available bare root. So Flower Carpet, you could have 10 different colors, and that's the same idea. Again, not as much smell, but excellent flower power on a smaller plant and so on, that I don't have to deadhead is the big thing that changes with those. I can let those flowers go and more growth comes up and covers itself every time it blooms. So I've eliminated the deadheading. I still feed them, but no deadheading, and probably not as much spray either, to be honest. I still would watch them a little bit. Rugosa is the other half of that. And we showed you purple pavement. We have snow pavement. I have pink pavement. We got raspberry rugostar. I got a whole bunch of hybrid rugosas back there that if I wanted something like waist level with a rugosa style flower that I never had to spray, that would be your indestructible own root type shrub rose.
And those ground covers, are those okay like on a hillside or a cliffside in between rocks?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you just hit the magic word for me. I got one called Fragrant Spreader out in my rockery that just sprawls out, you know, 8 feet in between a bunch of rocks as it grows for the summer. It looks spectacular. You know, plus, you know, as long as we're thinking of my rose, if you came by my house and saw how hard it gets pruned, you'd probably go, what have you done? But that's the other thing with these ground cover / shrub roses. Don't sit there for hours and cut to buds and make this beautiful candelabra. You know, my fragrant spreader was 8 feet across. If you came by my house right now, it's a clump of green twigs about that big by that much across. And you come by in June, it's 6 feet across again in full bloom. So you can prune them much easier as well.
Gotcha. How far apart should you plant your roses?
Well, again, I don't want to give you a general rule with that because it's going to depend on which ones you choose. But as you pick your roses, look at the height. They're always going to have a nice, they have beautiful information tags on every single rose here that's going to tell me what it does, how it smells, where it goes, what color it is, and how big it gets. So it's going to depend on what style, Floribunda, Hybride, Grandiflora, and then how tall it's going to get. You know, if I was setting up a little rose garden, maybe I had an 8-foot deep bed, 20 feet wide. Let's just say that. I'm going to try to put my Grandifloras back where 6'3" me is, here. Then I'm going to go down and have floribund or, you know, hybrid teas and floribundas, and then something lower on the edge. So look at that. And I would also, boy, if I had a pointer, I'd show you, you know, if I'm setting up a bed like that, don't plant them in squares. You know, if I'm going to put roses in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, don't put 7 more right in front of them. Stagger, W pattern, you know, like that. I get more even sun across the whole thing. The air is going to flow through much better. I'm going to have a nicer little rose garden.
Excellent. Do you ever need to replace your rose plants? Or are they good for forever?
Well, you know, I don't say forever. And I, you know, again, I'm not saying it's a 5 or 10 year thing. They should last for a long time. But yes, in my days, I have seen plenty of roses that needed to be replaced. And frankly, you know, they're probably roses that they should not have been planted here anyway for them sometimes. So I'm surprised no one's asked me about, you know, sterling silver and Tropicana and these roses that we see in magazines that are spectacular, terrible growers in Western Washington. That's why we don't carry them. So there's some that you may want to try. You think you're a rose gardener, may the force be with you kind of thing. But, you know, just be careful which ones you choose, because you may be disappointed with some of those strange ones.
What's the best way to control the spread of rugosa roses?
Oh, rugosa rose is going to spread. That's a total root system spreader. So, I mean, if you wanted to put them in, you can always chop with a shovel. If you're not in for that, you know, maybe a little bit like we talked about with some other plants like raspberries yesterday. Maybe you get some bamboo barrier and you try to get a, you know, a big circle of it laid out in your garden where you want to plant, and that just kind of tells those surface roots no more. And then you can probably keep it maintained a little bit easier and a little less of your digging on the edges. But that is what rugosa rose is. You know, that's the reason you might want it in certain areas and maybe not right next to the front door, you know, or in the front of a border. I want to give that some room in the sun. Do your thing, you know, let it create a nice little barrier for summer color.
Can you talk a little bit about deadheading? What's the right way to go about that?
Well, deadheading always is one simple thing, and I'll show you this when we do our class in June, because I don't have anything growing right now that I can do it. You always cut above 5 leaves, okay, to an outside bud. Always remember 5 leaves. If I've got a long stem rose and there's my bloom at the top, okay, and I follow that stem down, I'm going to have growth coming out both directions, all directions, and I may see leaflets that are in groups of 3s or 7s or 5s. 5 is the magic number. If you want to get your next flower as quick as possible, it is always 5 leaves. So I'm scanning, you know, we had a Mr. Lincoln in my big red hybrid tea, and it's about done, and petals are falling off. Time to deadhead you so that I can get another flower. I'm going to follow that down to any set of 5 leaves I want, but I'm going to try to pick one that is going away from the center. And for me, I'm going to try to go as low as I can, because I'd rather keep that rose here and not cut it here and let it get 9 foot tall by the end of summer. So go down on as far as you can, in my opinion, on most. You can do it either way, but it's always 5 leaves is the magic number. If I cut, you know, here I got my pruners here. Hopefully I won't cut my finger, but let's just pretend I'm not going to cut my finger, that there's my rosebud, my little knuckle right there. If I'm going to cut, I'm going to go right there, 45 degrees, about 1/2 inch above my knuckle. Then that bud breaks and off we go with another flower.
I'm not going to lie, that stressed me out a little bit.
Yeah, it stressed me out too, I'll be honest.
Can you talk a little bit about watering requirements? Yep. Somebody asked specifically for shrub roses, but in the hot summer months versus, you know, now.
You won't have to water a rose in our climate until you get to summer, I'll be honest with you. If we start watching May, you know, let's call it May, mid-May through September, you know, that would be the 4 or 5 months I want to supplement my rose with a little bit of irrigation. Absolutely water in the summer. Roses are not drought tolerant by any means. Rugosa is probably a little bit more, to be honest with you, but our typical rose garden, we're going to get on a watering schedule. I like creating a basin around the base. You take a little rim of compost, you can make yourself a moat, and I could walk out there, water at the base, never overhead, or you're going to ask for more disease. But I'm going to walk out there on occasion. It's not every day. You know, I'd say on a new rose this year, I'd probably be checking it, giving it 2 good waterings a week when it's hot in the summer. If it's an old rose garden, probably once a week is plenty.
Okay. We keep talking about this in different settings, but grass that's underneath your plants or in unwanted places, what's a good organic way to get rid of that without hurting the plant?
Yeah, you can't get any spray on the rose foliage or the bark. So let's start with that. And if I want to use something natural, I'm going to come down here and get either burnout or botanical cleanup. Those are 2 good natural herbicides that have no chemical in them, but it still doesn't change the fact rose is a plant. My weed is a plant. I cannot get that spray on my rose. It is way too cold right now for any herbicides to work. Same question came up yesterday with berries. Do not think you're going to go buy a bottle and spray and have anything work here for a while. You're talking like probably a later March to mid-April, depending on what the weather does. Once you see those weeds or that grass actively growing, now I can get the spray on there and take care of it. Maybe it's a patch with a lot of roses and you be real careful where you spray. Get a piece of cardboard, you know, something you can put up against that plant, spray the ground. It doesn't hurt the root system or anything, and get those weeds sprayed, but do not get it on the rose itself.
Is it true that you shouldn't plant a new rose where there used to be one planted before?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I mean, again, my question, if you were here, we'd play a couple questions, would be, well, why did the rose crash? You know, yes, maybe if you had, you know, crown gall or some root rot or a different type disease, I'd hate to have the same thing happen again. If it's a well-drained spot, it's totally fine. That's the only reason you would have any kind of root issues. So we would get that rose out of there entirely, not just the top, but the roots and everything. Amend the soil, just like we talked about with new roses, and then off we go with the new one.
We talked a little bit about the own root plants versus the grafted. Somebody asked on their rugosa that it has a lot of suckers that occasionally flower. Is that normal? Are those part of the, you know, the...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, rugosa is always going to be own root, and the hybrids are always own root. And that's the deal with the rugosa. If I took one home and planted it, I've got 4 or 5 canes and a whole bunch of blooms this year. Root system's going to send up another one and another one and another one, and it will flower just the same as the parent plant.
Circling back to the watering in the summer, do you have, you know, certain advice on soaker hoses versus sprinklers, or, you know, what's the best way to get them the water they need?
Well, again, let's attack that in 2. Hand watering is great. Soaker hose is excellent because, again, I'm on the ground level. I don't like the sprinkler idea unless you're real careful, because if I run a sprinkler, I am wetting down flower, foliage, ground, everything. You're probably asking for more disease. Now, if you're talking about in the summer, the sun shines out, you're out there in the morning, you know, or when the sun is up and you run the sprinkler, totally fine. It's getting on the leaves, sun's drying it off, everybody's happy. If you've got a sprinkler system and it's coming on at 3, 4, or 5 o'clock in the morning and you're soaking everything down, and then the sun's not up for a few hours, now you're asking for the black spot, the mildew, and some foliage issues.
Excellent. I think we've hit most of these questions. There's always more that keep popping up as we talk about things. You know, please, again, feel free to send us an email, sunnyside@msn.com. Trevor will be here answering emails today. We're happy to continue private conversations, especially if there's something personal and specific going on with your plant. Send us some pictures and some details. He's happy to identify kind of what's going on and what are good solutions to help you move forward. Again, we appreciate everybody joining us. We hope you stay safe in the snow and that we get to see you here around the nursery. Take advantage of that discount. It'll last all the way until Sunday the 21st. Thanks again for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you at our next class, what, 2 weeks from now?
Yep. I think it's long. I think it's time for some grass time, some lawn time. All right. Stay safe, everybody. Thanks for joining us.